Welcome to 101, a podcast for young women interested in careers in film and TV.
We'll sit down with industry professionals, ask them your questions, and get the answers you need to know.
101. It's a beginning.
Hey guys, it's Kate and Meredith with 101, a podcast. Welcome to our third season.
I know, it's pretty crazy. Like, we started this in 2020 during COVID, right? And here we are. We've had some pretty amazing guests so far, and more to come.
We're so happy to welcome our guest today, Jason Griffith. Jason and I have known each other. Jason, how long have we known each other? A long time.
If we go all the way back to the beginnings, almost 20 years.
We were in, was it Broadway or off Broadway?
Oh, there's Triple Off Broadway, I believe.
Yeah, it was down on the Lower East Side.
It was on one of those streets on the Lower East Side that you've never even heard of.
Yeah.
Keep walking, you're like, well, there's Essex.
Yep.
Well, there's Houston. Where is this ridge?
It's like the Harry Potter street of New York City that nobody goes to unless you have the magical cart thing.
In fact, I want to say the theater was right next to a sewing machine shop that looked like the last time the door was open was 1938.
Exactly.
And it was held open for President Hoover, and that was it.
That's true. That is true. Yeah. And we did a play that was, I don't want to say the worst play.
I'm putting play in quotes.
Okay, but they served drinks, which made you feel okay inviting people because you knew that they were mostly drunk while they were watching the play.
Yes. And at that age, I think we were all foolish enough to think, yeah, our friends would love to drink antifreeze that's just being passed around in a pitcher, like literally passed around in the audience.
Nobody wants their vision. It's fine. Flash forward just to kind of like wrap up the story. Then Jason and I kind of lost touch, and then Walter Hoffman put us back in touch. And then Jason was the lead in Threebound, which was one of the feature films that I've done.
I got to know both of your faces very well editing that movie.
Sorry. I'm not really one for like multiple films, especially if you feel like the story's been told. But then I was thinking, like, if we did Threebound too, like, I would be delighted. I don't know what it would be about, but like getting the same group of people together to work together again, like, I'm in.
Threebound 2 one more time. Meredith, you edited that feature. How much footage did you have to regretfully leave on the cutting room floor?
Oh my God, the amount of improv that I had to cut because of the total runtime. I mean, it's so sad, like, because I think the first cut I had was like close to 2 hours, and we were like, this is not gonna fly, and we got it down to like 140, I think. 142. Yeah,
I think every cut was like the impossible cut, like just trying to cut it down. We would sit there, Daryl Ferrara, my co-director, and Meredith and I would be on the phone, and we'd be like, because Meredith was editing from LA, and it was just like, oh man, what if we took like 10 seconds off of this? And and it was hard.
Yeah, and sometimes it does force you to look at the script in a different way and how you piece together certain scenes. So like, for instance, we did swap some scenes because it flowed better than better on screen than what was originally in the script, and you kind of figure out how to make things work and in the cut that isn't necessarily right along the path of the script. So
I know this was like such a big long intro that wasn't just about Jason.
But Jason, as it should not be. Yeah.
Well, no, because Jason, you're our guest and it's all about you today. We want to know, like, how do you define your role? Because I know that you do lots of different things, but how did you start? What was your journey to like all of the things that you do now?
Well, I define myself as an actor. I know a lot of people will throw the voice actor caveat on that, and where I don't necessarily protest that. I don't think it's fair to just call yourself a specific type of actor. I think if you're an actor, you're an actor. Even though 99.9% of what I do is voice acting, there's so much that I learned from stage acting, film acting classes that all has to go into voice acting in order for it to be believable or come off the page. I did my first play when I was 12 of school theater, fell in love with it. Fell in love with all of my female co-stars. So I thought, this is cool. I really like this. I'm a little nerd boy. These girls are hot. Flash forward, my cousin and I started taking acting classes. We were filming home movies every weekend. I got a Panasonic OmniMovie VHS camcorder when I was 13, and I used it until it literally broke. We both attended a talent convention in Florida when I was 15, and met an agent who said, if you come out to New York, I will represent you. So my cousin was 2 years older. He moved out before I did. I ended up moving out after I graduated and started auditioning immediately for commercials, TV shows, you name it. And ironically, the very first thing I booked was a stage show called Goosebumps, live on stage, the R.L. Stine,
No
tour.
way.
Yeah. And so my first director was Rupert Holmes, who was the guy who wrote and sang the Pina Colada song. The star of the show with us was Paul Benedict, who, if you remember Waiting for Guffman, he was the faux Guffman, also Mr. Bentley on the Jeffersons. That was wild, being 17 and my very first professional acting role with this guy, this legend who's been in the business for, since the 60s. And I thought, surely it'll be like this forever. And then the tour was canceled and there was nothing. It was just a dead zone of, oh man, did I make the wrong choice? Because I was still going on auditions. I was still living in New York, but just nothing was happening. And, I get little things here or there, but my cousin, who was over 18 at this point, but looked 14, was cleaning up. So he was doing all the New York television. He was doing commercials. He was doing movies. He was getting major callbacks from major movies. And I had the opposite problem because I was 18, but I looked 40. So nobody wanted that. So what ultimately happened was I had recorded an outgoing message on my answering machine as a game show host. And it was the Jason Griffith show. And you were the guest. And beep, And my agent was calling me for a different audition, heard that message, and it just so happened that there was an audition casting for a radio commercial for, I want to say it was like BMW or something, where they needed a cheesy game show host sound. So he heard that, thought, oh, I'll submit Jason on this because obviously he does that voice. I booked the job. That just started the flow of like, oh, we'll send him in for this voiceover and this voiceover. And then I became the voice of JetBlue. And then I was doing Burger King, and then I was doing Zit commercials. But it was still about 3 to 4 years of that before I even auditioned for my first cartoon. So I didn't audition for Sonic until 2003. And I know, I remember I just had booked my very first series, anime series, and I was going to be the lead. It was like $50 an hour or something I was really excited about. I was like, oh man, I'm going from at the time I was working at John's Pizzeria, seating people constantly for no money. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to make $50 an hour doing this awesome job. And at the last minute, they pulled the plug on it and they said, Jason's never done this before. Before I even went into the studio, they're like, we're changing our mind because it's going to be full days. We don't know if he's up for it, whatnot. So I lost that job. Almost immediately after that, I get an audition for Fox's Saturday morning cartoon lineup. And I'm going in for Sonic the Hedgehog. And I'm like, well, of course I'm not going to get this, because I'm thinking to myself, this no-name anime that I can't even remember the name of now, they replace me before I even start. Who's going to hire me for this national, video game icon? And so I go in, I give an audition, and I think all right. And then I get a call back. And I remember at the callback, I was doing the same thing I was doing as you do at a callback. You try to bring in the same sort of feel, that got you called back in the first place. And I just remember the producer going, you did a different voice for a different character. Try that one for Sonic. And I'm like, oh, boy, well, here we go. So I do that voice. I leave thinking, oh man, I'm not going to get this, obviously. At the time, because I was working like 5 different little jobs, I was a glorified intern at my agent's office, basically making petty cash, answering phones, putting out breakdowns, stuff like that. And my agent happened to be out of town the day the call came in from the studio, and I'm the one who answered the phone. And they had no idea. And they said, oh yes, Jason Griffith came in to audition for Sonic. And I went, oh great, I get to hear the rejection firsthand. This is fantastic. And they said, yeah, we'd like to book him on Wednesday for Sonic the Hedgehog. And I mean, the phone literally dropped out of my hand. Like I almost fell off the chair. I was like, oh great. I'm like writing everything down, like 8 a.m. That sounds great. And I wanted to tell them the whole time, it's me. It's me. But it probably would have been like, never mind. That was really the gateway for me. That opened so many doors for me because it was a studio where they were doing 10 cartoons at once. So I was on every single one of those cartoons. Directors branched off, went to different studios. They would bring me to their studios with them. So I just, from the time I was like 23, I think I was able to work consistently doing voiceovers. And I was also, as Kate knows, I was living in what I like to call a halfway house in Times Square because it was actors, artists, and the formerly homeless. And a lot of times you just did not know who was who. Just to give you a feel of the place, the only place I was ever punched in the face was in my hallway. There were murders in the lobby. It was a great time, but I was also paying next to nothing.
I will just add to that's the only place, like only building in New York City where they like detained me. They're like, do you have ID? And I was like, I don't think I have ID. I'm just going to rehearsal.
Hate getting detained. Wow.
Everything branched out from there. And it, I don't know how to explain it. Things just got better and better. And the more I worked, the more I was confident that I knew what I was doing. Because in the beginning, when I was first recording Sonic, every session was, so this is the session they replaced me, or what am I going to do to screw this up this time? It was all self-doubt. I remember doing a Zit commercial when I was like 19 or 20, where the producer actually came into the booth with me and said, you remember what you did in the audition? That was great. Could you do that, more of that, and less of what you're doing here? And so, but I didn't know how to take direction at the time. Young me, and I think a lot of young actors fall into this trap, took direction as criticism. So anytime I would get a piece of what could have been great, game-changing direction, I would only take it as, they hate what I'm doing. Oh, it's only a matter of time. So I think the sheer volume of what I was able to do over the years put me in a place of like, oh, actually, I know what I'm doing, and they wouldn't be hiring me if I didn't know, so that comes with time.
Where did you study and like, what did you study?
Primarily, when I first moved to New York, it was the William Esper Studios. I studied with William Esper, the great William Esper himself, another gentleman, Joel Rooks. I studied at Stella Adler. I was at the Michael Howard Studio. I was with Anthony Abeson. I was with Brett Goldstein. When I moved to LA, I studied with Jeff Seymour. I studied with John Rosenfeld. Like I was always studying. I went because I just felt more inspired with everything else I was doing, with auditions, with other jobs, when I was in a good class surrounded by good people. Every now and then I would take a voiceover class, but they were always with casting directors, people that I thought, well, if I do a good job, they'll just bring me in. To anybody who wants to get into voiceover, she's a former casting director. Now she's a full-time coach, and I believe she's a manager, named Dorianne Elliott. You can get caught in this trap of just thinking, well, I'm just reading these lines in front of this microphone and that's it. But she really taught me how to, first of all, animate yourself or orchestrate yourself, conduct yourself when you're doing voiceover. Because if you're just standing there with your hands in your pockets, it's going to sound like that. It's going to be flat. It's just not going to be alive. But as soon as you can look at the paper and take the line up, even if no one's standing in front of you, and pretending you're talking to someone. And she was always great because on the other side of the window, when I was auditioning for her, she would always be doing one of like this, I couldn't hear her, but she's doing a lot of motions that either she's showing me, oh, this is that time when you're line to go like this, and that's the time I want to go like this, or, really had someone to bounce off of. So she is the first person to really teach me about, it's not just a conversation with yourself in the microphone. And it's not a conversation with a whole room of people. It's always just one person who's really interested in what you're saying.
For our listener who's like, okay, this is amazing, great stories, what are the nuances of the work that you do? Because there were some things that I know that you've told me that I was like, oh, I never knew that.
But with COVID, it became, if you have your own home studio setup and everything, we could still use you, even though the jobs are in New York. So I all of a sudden was able to do New York jobs and then LA jobs at the same time because I could do remote. And the one big thing that came out of that was what I'm doing mostly these days, which is dubbing foreign television shows and films into English. which is such a fantastic job. And because cartoons are awesome, but cartoons are big and everything has to be, whoa, you're, whoa, huh? You know, like every little thing is animation geared.
Yeah.
But with these film and TV things, it's the next closest thing to actual acting, I feel like, because you want to be real, you want to be believable, but you also have to capture what that character on screen is doing in such a way that it doesn't feel like it's like a, what do they call it? Like a UN dub, where, you know, like everything has to fit coming out of the mouth, the expression, the projection, everything. The coolest thing is, in my life, I don't have any time to watch TV or movies or anything. Like, it's, you know, I come home, it's like you're cooking, you're cleaning, you're putting a kid to sleep, or, you know, and then you basically have 10 minutes to yourself to record an audition and then go to sleep. But I've been able to watch all of these fantastic shows that I'm working on that I think some of them are just leagues far and away above what I've seen on American television. There's one I can't mention because of an NDA that I just finished for Amazon, where I play the title character, and it was just every single session. I walked out of that booth thinking, how this, I would have never known about this show had I not done this kind of work. Every aspect of voiceover has its own different nuance. I did a lot of pharmaceutical ads, and, you know, a lot of times you're just rattling off a list of side effects. But one of the things they always tell you to do, and another thing Dorianne was great about teaching me, is you just shrug it off. You know, everything you're saying, it's a horrible list of side effects, but you never want the listener to think, oh, that's horrible, I don't want that, you know. But, you know, you just shrug it off and you say, you know, could cause blindness, could cause, you know, and somehow that translates to the listener that this is not a big deal, and maybe I'd like to try that drug. And, you know, and then there's video games, there's books on tape, or audiobooks, I guess now. And also before the strike, I was doing a lot of loop group stuff.
I was going to ask you about loop group, because I was fascinated by this. So tell our listeners, like, what is loop group, and how is it used in post-production?
It's the most fascinating thing, because it's one of these aspects of filmmaking that is completely invisible. You know, unless you're in the world, it's hard to even fathom how this is like a job, but because it's so great, it's so cool. What we do basically is fill in a multitude of things in film or television, either crowd scenes, because when you see scenes with extras where they're talking to each other, they're completely silent on set, and then we go in and we fill in all those areas so they can pull back the level, they can push it, whatever they need to do, and it's not stepping on the lead dialogue. But in addition to that, we're also filling in fight reacts. If someone gets hit, oh, you know, that's a loop group doing that. We don't do Foley, so we're not doing the crushing, you know, the cabbage or whatnot for breaking bones. But, you know, sometimes we'll do clapping if there's a scene, sometimes. But then what I really enjoy about loop group is the specifics, which are a news broadcast, or if you hear like a radio in the background, or a telephone call. Sometimes there's a bunch of shows I've been on where I'm just the person on the other end of the telephone. I'm uncredited, but it's, you know, that's me talking to Don Cheadle as Miles Davis in his Miles Davis movie, you know, as well as like sports commentators. You get to do like the specifics that are sort of a little more present, but they're still a lot of times in the background. Sometimes they're in the forefront. Sometimes you'll get, you know, I've done work where there's a movie coming out where there's a commentator for a football game, and I'm the commentator. Really, what loop groups do is fill in these little spots that otherwise would have no sound to them. And usually it's like a group of you and, you know, 10 to 11 other people in a room all together. I'd say all in person now, except for some of the New York jobs. But well, with the strike, nothing is, you know, none of that's happening.
Yeah, I want to talk about the strike, but I also want to talk about the fact that, like, yeah, what you just described is things that people don't even expect or know about, that really brings the project and the piece to another level. You know, there's always layers and layers and layers on top of what we do, and I'm just happy that we got to talk about that.
Well, you know, it's funny, one of the sound editors, and so many, it's one of the surprising things, just because, you know, my brain goes on autopilot. When you think sound editor, I always think guy, man. But so many, I'm going to say majority of the sound editors I work with are women, and they're fantastic. They've been in some of them have been in the business since the 80s. The one woman I worked with, the very first woman I worked with, named Deb Wallach, she's fantastic, and she edited sound for one of my favorite movies, which was She Devil, with Meryl Streep and Roseanne Barr.
Sure, yeah.
But one of them said at one point, I love loop groups. I love it these days because it only makes the movie better. Like, loop groups never make the movie worse. It always fills things out. And then when they play back and you can hear, oh, this is how this crowd scene sounds now, or they play back the phone call where it was just, you could hear the editor or whoever off stage just giving the lines. And now it really comes to life,
Yeah,
it really gives it a
exactly.
whole new dimension.
Exactly. If anybody's interested in learning about sound editing and dialogue editing, we did interview a female sound editor, Lydia, from our season 1, I believe. And we also interviewed Dave Redding. So
I don't know, I think I know that. I think I know Lydia.
Lydia Templanitza.
Yes. Yeah, I know
Yeah.
Lydia. Lydia's fantastic.
She's unbelievable. Yeah, so she does dialogue editing too, and she's been around for years. So yeah, we enjoyed talking to her.
We interviewed her, and then she did our Subtext Sesh.
Stay tuned for another Subtext Sesh.
All right.
What is that? Can I ask?
Sure. Yeah, a Subtext Sesh it's a little less specific, like job related specific, and more nuances of being in the business.
Do you want to talk about the strike a little bit? Let's just talk about like what's going on. How does that affect you and people that you know in the industry?
I will say that I'm fortunate in the sense that the dubbing work I do, even though it is union, it's under a different contract, so I'm able to continue doing that, which has been great. Biggest effect on me has been not doing these loop group sessions. And what I hear now is the next step is a video game strike. I know there are a couple different companies that are trying to get video games recorded right away just so they can avoid, having to delay their titles. That being said, I don't know. I've heard 6 months. I've heard December when the strikes could end, but I don't think anybody. I know nobody knows for sure. But I have a lot of friends who are really eager to get back to work. Because this is what they do. I have friends that are specifically loop group actors. But the other thing to remember is, with loop group stuff, it seems to be a field that everyone wants to get into. Every single voiceover actor, every actor I've talked to, is nobody would want to turn down a loop group session, even if people turned it down thinking like, oh, this is lowbrow, this is a little below my pay grade sort of feeling. Those people end up coming around again, especially during COVID time, and saying, oh, how do I get into loop groups? So how do I do this? I was cast to do the voiceover in this movie called The Giver. I was just supposed to be a temporary voiceover for all the narration in the movie, but then Harvey Weinstein, because he was producing, heard my version of it and loved it so much he was going to keep it in the movie. But because of this strange, weird interaction I've had with Harvey, that really launched my being able to do ADR and loop group stuff. It's such a weird way to get in, but it seems like here's the two ways. Either you do a really phenomenal job on something and everyone's like, oh, we want this person, or you're a childhood star. I was so nervous in the beginning that I would write out the beginnings of sentences just in case my mind went blank, until one of the veteran actors came up to me at one point. He just took my notebook from me. You wrote down, how's your day going? And then like for the next cue, then he held my book and went, hey, how's your day going? Fine. How about you? Like
aside from writing like lines down, how do you get out of that, like that headspace? Because that happens to everybody. Like everybody has that moment that you're just like in whatever job it is, whether you're a producer, whether you're an actor, whether you're a sound designer, and you're just like on the spot. Like, how have you worked over the years to kind of get through that?
Slowly and steadily reminding myself I'm here for a reason, seeing other people with their self-doubts. And I've worked with actors who will do a scene and it'll be perfectly fine. And they'll be like, is that really what you were? I don't know. Is that, yeah, can I just do another one? Because, and they do it in a way. Now, look, I'm no stranger to this too. I've often said, let me do one more because I know I can do this better. But I've seen actors step in with this sense of like, I'm not good enough. It doesn't, and they're still like wishy-washy about it, and thinking to myself, oh, okay, even though they think they're being genuine or whatnot, that's bringing the energy in the room down for everyone, and thinking, I don't want to be that. You know what the biggest thing is, Kate and Meredith, that I think a lot of people forget about in this business is like, have fun. Like, why are we doing this if we're not going to have fun?
Of
If you're
course.
going to go in and you're just going to think, oh, I got to get this right. Oh, I'm not getting this right. It's like, first of all, everyone feels that in the room. Everyone feels, and whoever's listening to you is going to feel that. It doesn't translate. Sort of force yourself to have fun. And this is where the cold showers come in, because if you can force yourself to get into that cold, freezing water or pool, even though it's not what you want to do, it's so much easier to go into that room and just go, I'm up, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this cue. I don't need to write this stuff down. I'm just going to, whatever comes out, comes out. And a lot of times what comes out is, oh, you couldn't have planned it.
I think that the point that you made about, trying to have fun, I think that it's a culture for this industry to, yes, it's all about money. We are stuck to a certain time constraint. If you don't perform on that day, you've lost the whole day. You've lost the money, whatever.
Suffering for your art. Like, I feel like that's something that I don't know why it exists, but it's even like, it's just ingrained in so many artists. And you're just like, no, like, it is supposed to be fun. It's something that people forget.
It's so hard to put these things into words because they could sound so weird, but like, you got to feel like you're the coolest person in the room, that everyone does want your input, and I think that's what I was missing in the beginning of my career, thinking like, what does this person want? What can I give them that they're going to want? As opposed to, oh, let me just do what I do. And then a good director is going to tweak it in either direction. Blessed to work with so many great, and again, so many of them are female directors in dubbing. So glad I don't have directors that just go, oh, that was wonderful, let's move on. There's two directors in particular, both women, who I will do a scene and I'll think, doesn't get any better than that. And they will go, hold on a second, what if you blah, 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 blah. And like, the primal part of me is like, oh, we're going to ruin this one. Then I'm like, oh, wait a second. No, that's a great suggestion. And then go back and it's like, oh, I never would have realized that that next step in that scene if it hadn't been for that director. And I want to say, I feel like the most fearless directors I work with in dubbing are women.
What do you love about your job?
A better question would be, what don't I love about my job? I love everything from being in the car to arriving at the studio to talking to the director to watching the scenes that I'm doing. I'm talking specifically about dubbing right now. And then thinking, I get to be that voice coming out of this amazing performance.
What about the business would you change if you could?
That's a tough question because I know what I would want to change, but I don't think it would be a good idea. I want to say the sheer magnitude of people auditioning for projects for voiceover is overwhelming, because everyone post-COVID wanted to amp up their studio. So everyone has a studio now. There's so much more, I want to say competition, but it's not exactly that, because you're just competing with yourself. But there's so many voices now going in for the same role that maybe only 50 were going in for, 25 previously, that it's much harder to land new work, I feel. And again, why I'm so grateful for directors and producers and people that I've worked with that just bring me on or bring me in specifically for an audition that they're like, I know you can do this part, as opposed to, getting auditions from my agent and it's like, oh, for a new, car brand or something, that it's like, oh, all right, there's gonna be 5,000 people auditioning for this. And now I was told something years ago that made me like rejoice and then cringe and, in sadness at the same time. I booked a job and the people said, we just want you to know that after we heard your audition, we didn't listen to any other auditions. And I went, that's so cool. Oh, that's happened to me. I'm sure that's happened to me before, where it's like, you think, oh, this is a great audition that nobody may ever hear, And I think with so many people auditioning now, there's just no time. So it's like, once you land on something you like, even though there may be 300 more auditions or 30 or one more audition, it's like, we don't need to hear that because we know we want Todd. I've been so fortunate in my career, in my life. I don't think there's a lot that I would say should be different. You go through these periods of downtime, and you go through these periods of there's just no work coming in, you know, and I've been through so many of them that I finally realized, oh, not only are these necessary, but they're like a blessing, because when you do have the work afterwards, you realize how fortunate you are, and you don't get stale and you don't get complicit.
For somebody who is interested in sort of following along the path that you've laid out for yourself, you know, what would be the best advice?
So I would suggest know what kind of, if it's voice acting, you want to do. And I know the amateur will say, well, I'll do everything. And I have done everything. But specifically, if you want to do cartoons, you should watch cartoons and you should emulate their voices. You should record yourself doing that and listening back and then tweaking. You know, there's so many times when I've done a voice where someone will push me into another direction with the voice that I wouldn't have done on my own. But it's always good to just exercise that option in yourself on your own. Like, I could do the old man like this, or I could do the old man like this, or I could do the old man like this. You know, so there's just even those little silly things. For a commercial audition, again, one of the great things Dorianne Elliott taught me was to always have a word before. So if it's new maple brown sugar flavored instant Quaker oatmeal, it almost takes longer to say than it does to make. If you put a hey, new maple brown sugar flavored instant Quaker oatmeal, it almost takes longer. Or you could say, look, new maple brown sugar flavored instant Quaker. Or, hey, did you know new maple brown sugar flavored instant Quaker? It changes. This is a very long answer for this question, but if you're going into an audition and a casting director asks for 3 in a row, the biggest mistake you can make is to do 3 of the same reads. I learned that the painful way, because I went in for a ketchup commercial. I did that. I left and never heard anything. And then about a month or so later, I go in for the same casting director and she says, hey, you know, you were the second choice for this Heinz campaign. I said, oh, I didn't even know. She's like, yeah, you know why you didn't get it? Because all 3 of your reads were the same and they wanted to hear range. And because they weren't doing callbacks, they didn't have time to say, maybe, well, let's see, you know, they just had to pick someone who had done 3 different reads. So that's a huge piece of advice. I fell into that trap for many years because I'm like, I could just do it better. I just do it better, as opposed to giving it a different spin. Recording yourself, listening, reading out loud, especially as a voiceover actor, because again, 90% of your day is you seeing the words for the very first time 5 seconds before you say them. I think there's a misconception with on-camera acting that you're going to get the script and go home and be able to practice it. Nope. Not even a little. Not for cartoons, not for dubbing, not for commercials, not for anything. Books on tape. That's it. So practice that. And then, especially if you're in a market like New York or LA or Chicago, take classes when you think you're ready. When you're getting to the confidence level where it's like, I really want to try this out, as opposed to I still don't know what I'm doing. When you think you're ready, take classes with casting directors. And if you are good enough, and I've seen this happen many times, the casting director will bring you in to audition for things. With Dorianne, I know she's done this all the time, where she's brought people in and all of a sudden they're the voice of Purina, or they're the voice of CarMax, or it's like, and all of a sudden, oh, my babysitter wanted to get into voiceover. She got into my class. I brought her in for this audition because I was like, her voice would match this. And all of a sudden she's got a voiceover career. There are ways in. You just have to be patient and you have to be diligent with yourself. Another great piece of advice. You're going to see taglines for commercials on billboards all over the place. The new Kia Soul 2023, anything like that. As soon as you're driving, you see a billboard, and immediately do that tagline 3 times differently, because it keeps you in that mindset of like, oh, they're going to hand you a piece of paper and you're just going to have to do it. You don't have time to think about it. And especially in an environment like driving or something where you're not like, I'm at an audition right now. Once you are at the audition and there's people trying to like talk to you, and or people like, practice their lines next to you, and you're all like unfocused about it. This sort of exercise will really focus you into doing it on the spot.
What director, film, artist has inspired you? What speaks to you as an actor?
Well, certainly you, Kate, because of watching you put what should have been 6 months of shooting into a week and a half and making it work. That was hugely inspiring to me. I don't know that I've met anyone as dedicated as you in that sense. That's hugely inspiring. I mean, acting wise, like I've always been a fan of the weirdos like John Malkovich. I think Philip Seymour Hoffman, people that weren't traditional, here's how cookie cutter, how to do it. I think the people that surprised me the most are the people who inspired me. And I get inspired by what inspires me at the moment.
I mean, I think it's great advice. It's like, keep your eyes open, be aware of the world around you. It's not always going to be Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's going to be the guy in your acting class or the woman in your acting class. And that's happened to me before. I've worked with such and watched such incredible performances in acting class, which I think is always a great indication that you're in the right place.
Huge.
Well, Jason, I can't even begin to thank you for everything that you've shared with us, everything that you've shared with us over the years. And I think the world of you, and I love working with you, always have. And I wish you all the best. And our listeners, if you have any questions that you want to submit to us in the world of voice acting or loop group or anything that we've covered in this episode, send us a note. Jason, it is always a pleasure. Thank you so much. And we'll be in touch with you, and we'll watch what's next.
All right. Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.
Well, that's our show for today. Thanks so much to our guest, and thanks to you, our listeners.
Please, please, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, rate and review us. We can handle it.
Want to learn more about 101? Check out our website, www.101podcast.com.
Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, all at 101 Podcast.
We'll see you next time.